Yeah, welcome back. So today I think we will do the proof of the Lagrangian multiplier theorem, the problem NEP, which I had stated earlier and showed you some examples also, and emphasized the need for the regularity condition there. How if the regularity condition is not met, then there may be a solution, optimal solution, but this particular set of conditions may not be valid. So today I'm we are going to start proving the Lagrangian multiplier theorem. In today's class, we will do first order necessary proof for first order necessary conditions. In the next class, we will do the proof for second order necessary conditions, and sufficiency conditions will come later too. So the problem that we are considering, if you recall, is the problem of minimization of x, where the x is a n-dimensional vector and there are equality constraints, typically non-linear now we are considering. So linear constraints can also be considered as a subset of this, and these constraints are described as h1 of x is equal to 0, h2 of x is equal to 0, and so on up to hm of x is equal to 0. So these are the conditions. So for example, you could have x1 square minus log of x1 log of modulus of x1, for example, equal to 0 is a or x2 is a non-linear equality constraint, or you could have something to be on circle, for example, this is equal to 1. Of course, quadratic constraint, but still this thing, or e to the power x1 minus e to the power x2 plus of x3 cube to be equal to 0, something. I mean, it could be any. These are examples of non-linear equality constraints, and this problem was where we had ax is equal to b. This one is the LEP problem, and this one we proved the Lagrangian multiplier theorem for this particular problem as under the regularity requirement condition requirement, that rank of A is equal to M, where A is a M cross N matrix, so full row rank condition. Then if X star is the optimal, then this will go to 0. So this is the what we are now considering is a generalization of this, which is considered here. Now the gradient vectors, there the uh, A transpose matrix is essentially the matrix of the gradient of the first equality constraint, second equality constraint, and then the last equality constraint. There we used the proof, we proved by considering that if you are at one point, feasible point x bar, and if you go to say some another feasible point, then this direction of movement completely is a feasible direction of movement, and the d has to come from the null space. Unfortunately, in this problem, where we are dealing with nonlinear constraints, we cannot have directions, feasible directions. That is why we need another proof. A simpler and a different proof was given for the LEP problem, but now an entirely different approach will have to be followed while proving the NEP problem. The reason is, if you, for example, say that this is a and this side is the feasible region, and suppose the x star is somewhere here, then what happens is, and you are somewhere here, then you have to move across the feasible arc here. So there is a notion of feasible arc here, but no notion of feasible direction. A tangent direction, if you, this is the constraint which is active, and you are at this point and you move in this direction, you will become infeasible. So you can only move across feasible arcs, and modeling physical feasible arcs is not mathematically as straightforward as modeling the feasible directions which which we could do while doing the equality constraints in the LEP problem. So we will be using what I'll be introducing to you a penalty function approach for proving this theorem. So it gives you a new proof to this, a new approach to proving also. So let's first complete the statement of the theorem and then we will come to the proof. We are considering the NEP problem, which is minimize f of x subject to the m nonlinear equality constraints, and we are going to assume that both f and all the constraint functions hi's are coming from C square, which is to say that they are twice continuously differentiable functions. If only first, if they are from C1, that is continuously differentiable only, then we will only have first order conditions. If they come from C square, then we will have both first order necessary conditions and the second order necessary conditions. Now, whenever we derive necessary conditions, we always start by saying that let x star be a local minimum. Why do we start with x star being a minimum? We start with x star being a minimum because we only want to find out that if it is a minimum, what all necessary conditions it should satisfy. So if, again I have said this earlier also, if some point satisfies all the necessary conditions, it becomes a good candidate for being a local minimum. Only when it satisfies also the sufficiency conditions, you can say without fail that it is indeed a local minimum, and usually giving necessary and sufficient conditions for generic problems is difficult. So we have a set of necessary conditions, we also have a set of sufficiency conditions, and there could be some example problems which lie in between this, in the gap between, they fall in the gap between the necessary conditions and the sufficiency conditions. So if they meet necessary conditions but do not meet sufficiency conditions, then you have to do a problem specific investigation to figure out whether it is indeed a local minimum or not. Now, going further, we are assuming that the gradient vectors of the constraint functions, so gradient of h1 uh, uh, h1 at x star, gradient of h2 at x star, and gradient of hm at x star are all linearly independent. This is also called as the regularity condition. And if you, in other words, if you put this as a matrix, this will become a n cross m matrix whose rank will be m. That is, it will have a full column rank. And then if all this is set, then that is there is a local minimum x star and it comes from C square and regularity conditions are met, then we can say that with guarantee we can say that there exists a unique vector, a vector of Lagrangian multipliers, m Lagrangian multipliers, lambda 1 star, lambda 2 star to lambda n m star, such that the gradient vector can be expressed as a linear combination of the gradient vector of the objective function can be expressed as a linear combination of the gradient vectors of the constraint functions all being evaluated at x star. So you can just take this on the right hand side as minus of f of x of gradient of f of x of star, and then you see what I am saying. So each of this here, each of this here, this is a n cross 1 vector. Then each of the gradient vectors is also n cross 1 vector, and this summation is running from I equal to 1 to m, and each of this lambda I star is a scalar, right? So therefore you can see that this is a valid sum. Now for second order, for second order, we say that if in addition it is twice continuously differentiable, then the Hessian matrix here, the Hessian matrix here of the objective function is to be summed up with the Hessian matrices of the constraint function, each of them weighed by the Lagrangian multiplier, and so whole of this is again a n cross n matrix. So this is a n cross n Hessian matrix. These are all n cross n Hessian matrices. So whole of this summation is a n cross n Hessian matrix. So the y is a n cross 1 vector. Y transpose is a 1 cross n vector. And now the requirement is that this Hessian matrix shows a positive semi-definiteness, definite like behavior, where on when y comes from v star, where v of x star is the subspace of first order feasible variations. And what do you mean by first order feasible variations? These are basically the tangents. Y represent tangents. So this is the gradient vector of the constraint expressed as a rho times the y vector is equal to 0. So I'll explain it here. So let's say this is a circle kind of a circle kind of a thing, constraint. So the gradient vector is going to be in this direction, and the y should be in this particular direction, so that so the y becomes like a tangent, so that this thing happens. So y is taken to be the subspace of first order feasible variations. That means subspace of first order feasible variations means that if the constraint could be approximated by first order linear approximation, then you would have got Ax is equal to b kind of a situation, in which case y vectors would represent the vectors from the null space, which now connects to your LEP problem, which then amounts to saying that a projected Hessian of the form Z transpose Z plus this Hessian of the Lagrangian function times Z should be greater than or equal to 0. That is positive semi-definite. So this becomes the second order necessary condition. Now my plan today is to just do the first order, prove the first order condition, and then we will take the second order necessary conditions proof in the subsequent lecture. So the proof that I am going to do for the first order condition, what is the first order condition? It's here. This is the first order um, condition, and just to make it neat and clean, we'll just rub all this out, and so this is my first order condition that I want to prove today. Okay, gradient of the objective function is the linear combination of the gradient of the non-linear constraints evaluated at x star, which is a given local minimum to the problem. Okay, the proof that I am going to follow is based upon what is known as a penalty function approach. So the idea of the penalty function approach is that the constraint violation, if x is not a feasible point, then this vector h of x will not be equal to 0. So what is h of x here? h of x here is a vector like h1 of x, h2 of x, and so on up to hm of x. Suppose all of these are evaluated at some point x, suppose all of this is 0. Then what would it mean? It would imply x is feasible. And if anyone is non-zero, anyone, one or more, then it would imply that h of x is, vector h of x is a infeasible, x is in that case would be uh, x is infeasible, correct? So now what we are doing is the infeasibility could be positive or negative, each coordinate wise it could be positive or negative in this m cross 1 vector. But when we square and add, so what we are looking here is h1 square of x plus h2 square of x and so on up to hm square of x. This is what is shown here as square of the length of the value of the function h of x. Then this is always going to be greater than 0 if there is any infeasibility. And to that I am adding a penalty of k by 2. This 2 is just added in the denominator so that when I take derivatives later on, the 2's will cancel out. That's the basic idea. But k is a, in our case, in this particular case, we are going to take k as sequence as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on, tending to infinity. But basically k is should be positive so that there is a penalty put on infeasible points. Now the idea of penalty function approaches is that as this penalty keeps on increasing, any infeasibility dominates the penalty function. The penalty function is only a first two terms put together, and if there is any infeasibility, the penalty function will dominate the objective function value. So the first thing when you do a minimization of a the first thing that when you do the minimization of a penalty function is with a large penalty is that it will force feasibility. Once the feasibility is ascertained, and if you are looking at the minimization problem, then what is going to happen? The minimization will now drive to pick the best f of x which is feasible. So if it is a global search, you will get a global minimum if it exists. If it's a local search, then you will get a local minimum if it exists. So this is the basic idea of a penalty function. Straight away implementation can be difficult because it can create numerical stability issues, but that's not the point right now that we are looking into. We are only looking at the power of penalty function approaches in proving our work. But algorithms are also around this idea, but you have to be careful about your choice of penalty. Now there is third term which I have put in here, and this proof is based upon the proof from the Bazara-Sherali, not Bazara-Sherali, the Burtsika's book. It is a proposition 3.1.1 I have taken from the second edition, and this numbering. And this third term here is for technical reasons. Alpha is a scalar, a constant greater than 0, and I am penalizing any deviation of x away from x star by a quadratic penalty. So this term is going to run like x1 minus x1 x star square plus x2 minus x2 star square and so on up to xn minus xn star square. So this is any, if you choose any point x which is other than x star, this term will be positive, and alpha being positive, some positive penalty will come. But this alpha is a fixed number. K is usually a large penalty. Alpha could be just a very small number. The whole idea is here is the whole idea here is that when I am later on doing a minimization of this function to get an optimal estimate xk, which is an approximation of x star or so, I want that xk to be driven to x star. So if I don't put this penalty term here, if I don't put this this penalty term here, chances is that I will be able to derive something, but I may not be able to say that I am deriving my limit of limiting point of xk, k tending to infinity is x star. I may not be able to say. It may just go to some, it may just arbitrarily go to some other feasible point, in which case my proof will not get stuck. So I can keep alpha as small as possible that I want. So in the greater than 0. So in the limit alpha tending to 0, all my limits, again my proof will be valid. So it's like putting a small attractor around x star, so that in my sequence does not run away to somewhere else. All right. So in other words, another way of saying this problem is that suppose x star was a strict local minimum, then it would be the only feasible point with the least cost in a small enough neighborhood. Uh, but if it was a weak local minimum, then if you consider a neighborhood along around x star, a small neighborhood around x star, whatever small you take it, there would be always an another alternate alternate local minimum point, and hence I may not be able to force in such case that the limit of x limit k tending to infinity, the sequence xk goes to x star. So this handles the problem of any weak local minimums, and but if there is a strict local minimum, then probably this is not required. Okay, so now you have understood why we use penalty function. The idea is to approximate it, a constraint optimization problem by an unconstrained optimization problem, and solve an unconstrained optimization problem. And larger the penalty, more closely are you solving the original problem. And this one is only for the technical reason of the proof, that we want x to be attracted to x star. But if you are actually developing an algorithm, you won't know x star, so therefore this term will not be used. Okay, so we have taken care of the first step. Now let's uh, let's look at what do we mean by x star is a local minimum. What does it mean? It means that we can choose an epsilon greater than 0 such that f of x of star is the best point among all fx where x is a feasible point in the closed sphere. What is the closed sphere? Set of all x such that they are in the epsilon distance of x star. So I have missed out a bracket here. Let me close it here. So what it means is, if x star is a local minimum, what it means is that if x star is a local minimum, then x star, there exists a epsilon neighborhood which is defined by a sphere here around x star, such that x star is the best feasible point in the set S, consisting of x star and all other feasible points around it. So so this is basically step 2 that I have said, is essentially reinterpreting or technically writing what I mean by x star is a local minimum to the constraint optimization problem. And why I have put in blue the word feasible here. In blue I have put the word in blue, this feasible word in blue here, to say that if if you look at this neighborhood, it contains both feasible points and infeasible points. If a infeasible point is there, suppose this is 5. Now with the infeasible point, this number could even be 4. It doesn't matter. There is no problem because you are looking at a infeasible point could have a value which is lower than my objective function value local minimum. But no feasible point can have a value which is lower than 5 in that neighborhood. So that's why this word feasible is also important here. Now let now we come to the sequence, a sequence of xk's we are going to generate. We want to approximate the our we don't know how to approximate a constraint optimization problem through a penalty function approach. Now in the limit k tending to infinity, this thing, any non-zero deviation will be so heavily penalized. So our idea is that feasibility will be enforced. So to do that, we will have to consider in the limit k tending to infinity, which means that we are now going to consider a sequence. So therefore, let xk be an optimal of the problem. What is the problem now? Minimize f of x of capital F of k of x, which is the objective function plus the penalty function plus this technical term over the set S. This is the set S. The set S, the reason, this is again another constraint optimization problem, mind you. So it's not still an unconstrained optimization problem because the x has to be restricted to being within this sphere. So we look at this constrained optimization problem, and I am saying let xk be the optimal to this. How can I say that xk is optimal to this? There is a optimal to it. It follows from Weierstrass theorem. How does Weierstrass theorem come into picture? First of all, look at the constraint space. The constraint space is this set, which is a compact sphere because this is a closed sphere and bounded also in the epsilon region. So closed and bounded means my constraint is compact, and objective function is continuous. So if the objective function is continuous and the constraint space is compact, then it will achieve both a minimum and a maximum. That is what the sufficiency condition as stated in the Weierstrass theorem. So therefore we are done with the fact that this minimum will exist. There is no worry to bother about infimum, and if the minimum exists, this let this minimum be xk. Now Weierstrass theorem is always dealing with global minimization. So this xk will actually minimize this function in a global sense. Okay, so let it could be one or more candidates could meet the global minimum, but the one of them is x of k. So if you evaluate f of k, x of k, which is a global minimum of this problem over the set S, then two things come to mind. No other point in the set S will beat this value, right? And x star is the center point of this sphere, so therefore it is always feasible. So if I calculate f of k x star, then fk xk will be always less than or equal to fk x star, because this is a global point, minimum point I know for this constraint problem. This could also be a global minimum point or it may not be. So therefore this value is greater than or equal to this value. But when I calculate fk of x star, that is I substitute x star here, what happens? First term becomes f of x of star. Second terms becomes 0 because x star is a feasible point, so h of x of star is 0. So second term vanishes, third term also vanishes. So therefore fk x of k is going to be f of x of star itself, and therefore what do I get? I get that fkxk is going to be less than or equal to f of x of star. So I have basically said that this function, this optimal value for this auxiliary problem that I have defined here, this its optimal is bounded above by f of x of star. Okay. Now this fact I am going to use to deduce that in the limit k tending to infinity, this point xk will become, in the limit k tending to infinity, the hxk vector will represent a feasible vector, that is each of its terms will be 0, and that will follow automatically if the this limit goes to 0. That is to say that if this happens, this is what I am going to deduce, then it will imply that this goes to 0, this goes to 0, and each of these points are tending to be, each of these points in the sequence later on, x1, x2, x5, x10 and so on, the sequence will tend to become a feasible sequence. Okay, how do we deduce it? Let's do the deduction. First of all, say that it doesn't happen that way. Okay. First of all, to the contrary, assume that this limit does not go to 0. So if this doesn't limit does not go to 0, then this will be greater than some minimum threshold value, maybe 10 to the power minus 6, maybe 10 to the power minus 8 or whatever. But since this is not going to 0 and this is always non-negative, so it is greater than some epsilon or delta or alpha something, it is greater than some small number here, and therefore always greater than that. And then as the penalty term keeps on increasing, so the k by 2 term goes to infinity. So what will happen? Finally this term will go to infinity, because this will not go below a certain point, and this can be made as large as I want. So finally this will blow out, and this will make the problem unbounded. So fk xk will be unbounded above, it will tend to go to infinity. But that is not possible. Why that is not possible? Because we know that we have already deduced in the step 4 that it is bounded above, it is bounded above by f, optimal value f of x of star. So if this is not, this is going to infinity and this whole thing is bounded above, then these people should contribute towards going to minus infinity in some sense. But that is not going to happen. Why? Because this is only within epsilon distance. So this term is first of all always positive, and the best value, least value that it can take is 0. So therefore this term cannot go towards minus infinity. This best value it can give on the lower side is only 0. What about this term here? Again, the Weierstrass theorem, when applied to this particular problem said this has a minimum and a maximum. So the minimum means it takes a finite lower value. If it takes a finite lower value, then this term, if it takes a finite lower value, then obviously this term, I'm sorry, I should be considering uh, another problem here, which I'll write, let's say in yellow ink. Minim, I'm sorry, the yellow ink has not yet come. Let me rub this here and minimize f of x coming from set S. So this is the problem that if I look at it, Weierstrass theorem is applicable here. F is a continuous function, S is a compact set, therefore it will always attain a minimum. If the minimum is attained, it means it is finite. So therefore this has a lower bound. So this cannot go to minus infinity. This can only go up to 0. And this thing is rushing to plus infinity. Then what will happen? This whole thing will rush to plus infinity. And therefore, this step 4, what we have deduced, that fk xk will be less than or equal to f of x of star, will be violated if this vector doesn't go to 0. but this violation is not possible. That's a contradiction. So therefore, limit k tending to infinity, we will get this thing to limit to 0. So if this length of the vector, norm of the vector goes to 0, each of this point goes to 0. So therefore k tending to infinity, xk will become a feasible point. Now we don't know whether the sequence xk converges or not. To be honest, we don't know whether the sequence xk converges on to or not. But definitely we know that it has a limit point. What is a limit point? A limit point x bar. What is a limit point? A limit point is a point which means that if you put uh, there exists a subsequence in that sequence xk, so you could put some rule here called a rule or algorithmic rule, such that in the limit k tending to infinity, this will extract a convergent subsequence which converges to, let's say, some value x bar. At least one such limit point exists. Why does one such limit point exist? Recall we did sequences earlier and we said that a, a infinite sequence coming from a bounded set will always have a limit point. So that's the point that we are invoking. That's the point that we are invoking here, and we are saying that at least it will have one limit point. So then that limit point will basically satisfy the condition that h of x of bar will be equal to 0, because it's the subsequence k tending to infinity. This has to happen. The limit point meets that requirement, and therefore the limit point is a feasible point, to our problem, and is in the set S as well. Okay, so that now having been done, the we still need to show that before we can proceed, we still need to show that this limit point is same as x star. If it becomes some another limit point, I cannot apply any optimality proofs of unconstrained optimization later on. My idea is that I am considering a penalty by invoking the uh, God power of penalty function. What I am trying to do is I am trying to convert my constrained optimization problem to an unconstrained optimization problem, so that whatever I have learned about the unconstrained optimization problem optimality conditions, both the first order and the second order, I can apply it there. But to do that, I need to show that this x bar is nothing but x star. Towards this end, now just look, uh, evaluate uh, evaluate this function at x bar. So what happens? The first term becomes x bar. H of x bar is anyway 0, and this becomes x bar minus x star times this whole of this thing, and all of this we know is bounded above by f of x of star. So therefore, what do we get? Second term having gone, only the first term remains and the third term remains, and the summation of these two should be less than or equal to f of x of star. Now suppose that x bar is not equal to x star. If x bar is not equal to x star, then what happens? This whole term for alpha greater than 0 will become a positive term. If this is a positive term, then it means that f of x of bar is strictly less than f of x of star. But if f of x of bar is strictly less than f of x of star, and x of bar is a feasible point. Why is it a feasible point? Because it is meets the requirement h of x bar equal to 0, and it is in that epsilon neighborhood where x star is the nobody can beat, no feasible point can beat x star. It is in that epsilon neighborhood. Then we have got a contradiction, because now we have got a feasible point inside that same epsilon neighborhood such that f of x of bar is strictly lower than f of x of star, which is not possible. Therefore, x bar must be equal to x x star. And that's the that's the role of this technical penalty term, additional term that we had put. But alpha can be very, very close to 0, so it has otherwise no impact. Now we have proved that x bar is equal to x star. And once x bar becomes equal to x star, this term does not contribute anything to the objective function value also. So now that we have shown this, we have shown that any limit point is, first of all, limit point exists, and any limit point is nothing but x star only. So there is only one limit point, and that limit point is x star. So now if a sequence, if that limit point is x star and if that subsequence is going to x star, I'll just say the term that sequence is going to x star just to keep my vocabulary simple, but simple. Then what it means is that after, in that subsequence or sequence, after some m, some 1000, 10,000, 1,000,000, whatever, all k is greater than m, xk will be the interior point of the set S. Why? Because the sequence is converging to x star. And where is x star? X star is at the center. So this is your circle, this is your x star. You could move like this for some time, but finally you could go like this, whatever you could go, but finally you have to come here at the center. So beyond a point, all in the sequence, all the points will be within some delta distance of x star, and that delta distance, if I choose, will be always strictly lower than this epsilon distance, and therefore these points will become interior points of the, beyond the m, all the points will become interior points of the set S. If they become interior points, then for those k values, does this, will this play any role in optimality conditions? No. Now in that, now it is like looking in a small neighborhood. When you are looking at the, you are saying this is the optimal, this constraint set is far away, and hence you are only looking at unconstrained minimization problem. All neighborhood, all feasible neighborhoods are the neighborhoods corresponding to the unconstrained minimization problem, and hence the first order, I'm sorry, and hence the first order optimality conditions of unconstrained minimization problem will apply now to this minimize fk, xk, and I have dropped this particular constraint. So if that I do, okay, if that I do and apply the optimality conditions here now to this. So first is I will look at the gradient of this function f of x of k. So the gradient of this is grad of f of x of k. It's a n dimensional vector. First term is grad of f with x1, second term is grad of f of x2, and so on. Okay. What about the second term here? This second term here is summation of h1 square plus h2 square up to hm square. So first just look at h1 square. So the gradient function, gradient vector of h1 square, let me write it here. So the gradient vector of h1 square, suppose I am I like write x1 of gradient with x1. So it will be 2h1x into gradient of h1 with respect to h1x. Now suppose I take, I'm sorry, gradient vector of h1 square of x with respect to x2, then it will be 2h1 of x into gradient of h1 with respect to x2, and so on up to xn will be 2h1 of x into gradient of h1 with respect to xn. So if I now group it together in a compact notation, I can say that this is going to be equal to 2 times of h1 of x times this vector h1 with respect to x1, h1 with respect to x2, and h1 with respect to xn, which is nothing but 2 times h1 of x grad of h1 of x. So this is what I have written here. And k is just a scalar, so it doesn't play any role. And this 2 is the scalar 2 got cancelled with this 2. So actually the scalar multiplier was k by 2. 2 got cancelled. So I got k here. This is a scalar and this is that vector. So you could write it like this, or you could take this on this side. It doesn't matter because it's just a scalar. So you got this term, and when you take the gradient of the third term here, it's very easy. Alpha by 2, the square of the norm of xk minus x star, then the gradient term will be alpha times the, if you want, I'll just use the square bracket, xk minus x star. And so the this gradient vector, according to the first, if xk is the unconstrained minimum of this problem, then this gradient vector should be 0. So once this gradient vector is 0, good. Now, means k is, why is this why did we get this? Because k is an interior point of the set S, and k tending to infinity, that subsequence was going to x star. So now what I am saying is, look at this step also carefully. Every step is important, of course. That so far you see, I have not brought in the regularity condition anywhere. At some point of time it's stated in the theorem, it will have to be used. Now this is where I am using this condition. I am saying that this matrix xk evaluated at xk, this is a n cross m matrix. This is the constraint matrix. What is this matrix? This is h1 of x. Second column is h2 of x. Each of this is n cross 1 vector, and the last one is hm of x. Each of this is a n cross 1 vector. So this becomes a n cross m matrix. At x star, we said that each of these are linearly independent. So therefore it has full column rank, because the columns are less than n usually. So therefore this rank of this matrix is n. So if I look at this matrix, multiply by transpose, and look at this matrix, this becomes m cross n, n cross m. So this becomes a m cross m matrix, like 3 cross 5 times 5 cross 3, so a 3 cross 3 kind of a matrix. And this matrix is invertible. Why is this matrix invertible? Because if you look at, take any y and multiply it from both sides by y transpose and y, then look at this grouping here. This grouping is the transpose of this grouping only. So then this is nothing but square of the length of this vector. So first of all, this is greater than or equal to 0. So for that itself shows that this matrix is positive semi-definite. But because by the regularity condition this is full rank matrix, so this can go to 0 only if y vector goes to 0, then only it will go to 0. If y is not equal to 0, then this will not go to 0, so this will become strictly greater than 0. So therefore what we have showed is that for y not equal to 0, this product is y transpose qx, if you want to write it, is strictly greater than 0 for y not equal to 0, which means q is a symmetric positive definite matrix. The symmetricity is obvious. If it is a symmetric positive definite matrix, it is an invertible matrix, so therefore this also is invertible. Now if this point I have made earlier also in my proofs also, so I am using the same point here. I did it when I did the second order necessary optimality conditions for optimal point, where we said that it should be positive definite for sufficiency and so on. So the same point I am trying to make here. If this is if this matrix is positive definite at x star, then it will remain positive definite in a small enough vicinity, because y transpose y, this is actually just a function in x, and if it is greater than 0 at x star and it is a twice continuously differentiable function, then there is a continuity in this function. So suddenly from positive value it cannot go to 0. So if it remains positive definite in a small enough vicinity, then it will remain invertible also in a small enough vicinity. So because now it remains invertible in the small enough vicinity, what we are going to do is play a trick on this. Let me show you the trick now. I take this. This is a very interesting proof, though you may first time feel it a bit messy, but it's really not that messy. It's a very nice and elegant proof. I paste it here. What I will do is, first I will write this as k. In fact, I'm going to take this k scalar also, this side, k of h of x of k. I'm going to write this as minus of f of x of k plus alpha of xk minus x star. Other two things I have taken it on the left hand side. Now this is a n cross m matrix, k is a scalar, this is a m cross 1 matrix. So I will multiply this by the transpose, so that I can write this now as, I'll write this vector as kh of x of k vector. This is another matrix. This is a m cross m matrix which we just derived as invertible matrix, and if I have multiplied it by the transpose, I have to multiply it by the transpose here also, and then the remaining this term will just, I'm sorry, so copy and paste. So just a minute. This is not easy. I have to first rub this. Sometimes small things you want to do become messy, but this should do. Minus I will take here, and I'll take this here. So basically what did I do? I multiplied this transpose of this matrix on the left hand side here, transpose on the left hand side here, and I wrote like this. And then therefore this vector k of h of x of k can be written as minus of taking inverse of it, because see, every time you take invert, you have to prove first that it is invertible, and we have proved that. Otherwise it's just daydreaming, the inverse may not exist at all. So that is not something we should allow to happen, and we have proved that it has an inverse. So now I can write this as this is correct. Now look at this in the limit k tending to infinity. So in the limit k tending to infinity, this right hand term will go to h of x of star transpose gradient of h of x of star whole inverse into gradient of h of x of star, transpose is missed out, transpose gradient of f of x of star plus alpha of x k x star minus x star will become 0. So I can just close the close the bracket here. So this is a finite term, right? This matrix is known, this matrix is known, this matrix is known, the inverse is known. So this whole thing is finite. So we can call this vector as lambda star. So what it means is that this lambda star can be expanded as lambda 1 lambda star lambda 2 star to lambda n star is limit k tending to infinity. I'm copying from here and expanding it. K h1 of x of k, k h2 of x of k, and k hm of x of k, limit k tending to infinity. This is what is happening. So this is very important point. Even two things, this goes to 0, this goes to infinity. The product only goes to something finite, which is lambda x, lambda 1 star, lambda 2 star, and lambda m star. These are called the Lagrangian multipliers. Now let's get back to my itemized thing here. So incidentally, this matrix is called a Penrose-Moore inverse of the gradient matrix. Some other time I will speak more about it. So, but now you know that in the limit k tending to infinity, this thing goes to this thing goes to the vector lambda star. So if this vector goes, so what is going to lambda star? This vector k times h of x of k in the limit k tending to infinity is going to lambda star. This vector, so I'll just bring this k here and write this going to lambda star. This goes to gradient of h of x of star. This goes to gradient of f of x of star, and this term obviously becomes 0. So where does the whole of that thing go? The whole of that thing goes to this gradient of f of x of star times lambda I star times, where is it gone? This plus this matrix times the lambda star vector is equal to 0, which is what I have written here. And that is the very interesting proof of the first order optimality conditions for the NEP problem. The second order condition we will pick up in our next class. Thank you.